Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for a moment. The sound of a fork tapping against crystal cut through the hum of conversation. 200 heads turned toward the head table. My father Gary stood there in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, beaming with a kind of pride I hadn't seen directed at me in 29 years. Behind him, the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lodge framed Lake Tahoe perfectly. The water was a sheet of black glass under the moonlight, reflecting the snow-capped peaks. It was breathtaking. It was expensive. And it was mine. Tonight is about new beginnings, my father boomed, his voice amplified by the sound system I had paid for. It's about family supporting family. And in that spirit, I have a very special announcement. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My sister Cheyenne, sitting next to him in a custom gown that sparkled like diamond dust, covered her mouth with both hands. She looked shocked. She looked delighted. She looked like she knew exactly what was coming. "My daughter Grace," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the room where I stood near the kitchen door. "Grace has decided to give the newlyweds a gift that truly symbolizes the generosity of this family." He paused for effect. The room went quiet. I felt a cold prickle run down my spine, the kind you feel right before a car crash. Grace has transferred the deed to this property, her beautiful Lake Tahoe estate, to Cheyenne and her new husband. He pulled a document from the envelope and held it up. "To the happy couple, welcome home." The room exploded. Applause, cheers, whistles. Cheyenne shrieked and threw her arms around her husband. My mother, Lisa, was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, performing the role of the overwhelmed matriarch to perfection. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the piece of paper in my father's hand. From 20 feet away, I could see the blue ink of the signature at the bottom. It was a loop, a scribble, a forgery. My phone screen lit up in my hand. 8:14 p.m. I looked at the document. I looked at my father's triumphant grin. I looked at my sister, who was already accepting congratulations for owning a $4.5 million estate she hadn't paid a dime for. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have run up there and snatched the paper away. But I didn't. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. It wasn't shock. It was clarity. They didn't just want a wedding. They wanted a robbery. And they thought that because I had been quiet for 29 years, I would stay quiet now. They thought the applause would shame me into silence. I unlocked my phone. I opened the security app connected to the estate's smart system. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just tapped the button labeled Lockdown Protocol. The war had started. And they had just fired the first shot at the wrong woman. "I need you to be honest with me right now. If your family tried to give away your home to your sibling in front of 200 people, would you scream or would you stay silent and plot? Drop a comment with your reaction." I read every single people. 1. I stepped out onto the deck, and the glass door slid shut behind me, muffling the applause until it sounded like static. The air out here was biting 20 degrees and dropping, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the heat of the phone in my hand. On the screen, a progress bar was loading. System reset in progress. I looked through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I could see my father shaking hands, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. I could see my mother, Lisa, hugging guests, soaking up the admiration for a venue she couldn't afford to rent for an hour, let alone a weekend. To them, I was Grace the ghost. The quiet sister. The one who dabbled in computers and never brought anyone home for Christmas. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my distance was failure. They had no idea that the dabbler was the chief financial officer of a tech conglomerate based in Palo Alto. They didn't know that the ghost was the majority shareholder in the holding company that owned my father's debt. And they certainly didn't know that this wedding, the crystal stemware, the imported orchids, the 5-course meal they were currently devouring was paid for by me. $150,000. That was the final tally. I had funneled it through shell vendors and anonymous accounts so they wouldn't know. I let them believe my father's failing development firm had suddenly found a pulse. I know what you are thinking. Why would I spend a fortune on a family that treats me like a servant in my own home? Why didn't I just cut them off years ago? It is a trap called the normalization of cruelty. When you grow up in a house where love is transactional, you learn to pay in advance. You convince yourself that if you just write a big enough check, if you just solve enough problems, maybe they will finally see you as a person instead of an asset. But 3 months ago, when I saw the first draft of the wedding invitation that didn't even list my name as a host, something snapped. The hope died. And when the hope died, the strategy began. I didn't pay $150,000 because I wanted to be nice. I didn't do it for Cheyenne's happiness. I paid it as a severance package. I wanted to know with absolute mathematical certainty that I had given them everything. I wanted to buy the right to destroy them without a single ounce of guilt. When I burn this bridge, I want to know that I paid for the match, the gasoline, and the wood. My phone vibrated. Protocol active. Inside the lodge, the lights flickered once. Just a subtle dip in power, barely noticeable to the guests, but I saw it. The smart locks on the perimeter gates had just engaged. The Wi-Fi had been cut to a local-only loop. I wasn't locked out. They were locked in. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass. I wasn't wearing the emerald velvet dress because I wanted to look pretty. I wore it because green is the color of money. And tonight, the bank was officially closed. I took a deep breath of the freezing alpine air. It tasted clean. It tasted like the end of a very long, very expensive error. The glass door slid open behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew that perfume. It was expensive, floral, and cloying. Grace, my mother's voice drifted out sharp with irritation. What are you doing out here? Your father is looking for you. He wants a family photo with the deed. I turned slowly. My mother was standing there shivering in her silk wrap, looking at me with that familiar mix of disappointment and expectation. The deed, I repeated. Yes, the deed. Don't be difficult, Grace. Not tonight. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched me pay for her mistakes for a decade and called it duty. I'm not being difficult, Mother, I said, my voice steady and low. I'm just balancing the books. You're being dramatic, my mother sighed, adjusting her diamond hair clip. Another thing I had paid for without receiving so much as a thank you. It's just a piece of paper, Grace. A prop. Your father wanted a big moment for the toast. You know how he gets. A prop, I repeated flatly. A forged legal document transferring a $4 million asset is a prop. Is that the official stance? She waved a hand dismissively, the silk of her wrap rustling in the wind. Don't use words like forged. It sounds so ugly. We're family. What's yours is ours. We just accelerated the paperwork. The glass door slid open again. This time, it was Cheyenne. She stepped out onto the deck, her custom gown trailing on the damp wood. She didn't look grateful. She looked annoyed. Why are you ruining my night? She hissed, crossing her arms. Dad is waiting for the photo. Everyone is waiting. Can you just stop being so selfish for 1 hour? I stared at her. The word selfish hung in the freezing air between us. I looked at the sister whose tuition I had paid. I looked at the mother whose mortgage I had quietly settled 3 years ago so they wouldn't lose their house in Arizona. Selfish, I said, tasting the word. I paid for the champagne you are currently drinking, Cheyenne. I paid for the band. I paid for the dress on your back. And now you want my house? Cheyenne rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. The money guilt. You have so much, Grace. You have a penthouse in the city. You have stocks. You don't even use this place. It sits empty half the year. It's wasteful. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, entitled whisper. Besides, it's already done. I moved my winter wardrobe into the master closet this morning. Dad gave me the key code last week. We're going to turn the guest wing into a nursery eventually. So just let it go. Smile for the camera, sign the real paper later, and let us be happy. The breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the theft of the deed that stopped me. It was the violation of the space. They hadn't just planned a stunt for the reception. They had already moved in. They had unpacked their boxes in my sanctuary. They had violated the only place on earth where I felt safe from them. My father had given her the code. The security code I entrusted him with for emergencies. I looked at my mother. She wasn't shocked by Cheyenne's admission. She was nodding. She knew. They all knew. They had planned this invasion while I was busy wiring the funds to pay for their party. I felt the last tether of obligations snap. It was a physical sensation like a cable breaking under tension. I looked down at my phone. The lockdown protocol was fully loaded. "You moved your things into the master suite?" I asked softly. "Yes," Cheyenne said, tossing her hair. "And I'm keeping the view." "I hope you kept the receipts," I said. I tapped the screen. Execute. Behind them, inside the lodge, the warm, ambient lighting suddenly shifted. The golden glow turned stark, bright, and clinical. The music cut out, abruptly replaced by the sharp, rhythmic chirping of the fire alarm system. Not the loud siren, but the system alert that signals a security breach. "What did you do?" my mother demanded, looking back at the flickering room. "I initiated a security reset," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the lake. "The system no longer recognizes your codes. The electronic locks on the master suite, the guest wing, and the garage have just engaged. Biometric access only. And yours have been deleted." Cheyenne gasped. "My clothes are in there, my passport." "Then I suggest you find a hotel," I said, "because as of 60 seconds ago, this property is under digital lockdown, and you are trespassing." "You can't do this," my mother sputtered, her face flushing red. "It's her wedding night." "It was a wedding," I corrected her. "Now it's an eviction." I didn't wait for their response. I turned my back on them and looked out at the dark sky. In the distance, the rhythmic thrum of a helicopter blade cut through the silence. They thought the show was over. They thought they could bully me back into submission. But the man in that helicopter wasn't coming to save them. He was coming to help me bury them. The rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades grew louder, vibrating in my chest, drowning out my mother's protests. A spotlight cut through the darkness above, sweeping across the deck and blinding us for a second. My father, Gary, forgot about the deed. He forgot about the locked doors. He forgot about me. His head snapped toward the private landing pad 50 yards away, and his expression transformed instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by a desperate, hungry grin. "He's here!" my father shouted over the roar of the engine. He smoothed his tuxedo jacket, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and turned to the guests who were now crowding the windows, confused by the noise. "Everyone," he yelled, waving his arms. "No need to panic, this is a special guest. My new business partner from Silicon Valley." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with manic energy. "See, Grace, you worry about pennies. I make deals. Alexander is here to finalize the merger. This company and this family is about to be worth 10 times what your little stock options are worth." I didn't say a word. I just watched. The helicopter touched down, kicking up a cloud of dry snow that swirled around the landing lights like diamond dust. The engine whined down. The door opened. Alexander stepped out. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat over a bespoke suit that fit him like armor. He carried a slim leather briefcase in his left hand. He didn't look like a wedding guest. He looked like a man arriving at a hostile takeover. My father practically ran across the frozen ground to meet him. He grabbed Alexander's hand, pumping it enthusiastically, leaning in to shout something over the dying turbine whine. He looked small next to Alexander. He looked like a man trying to sell a used car to a shark. I watched them walk back toward the deck. My mother had composed herself, putting on her best hostess smile, ready to charm the billionaire. Cheyenne was fluffing her dress, clearly deciding that if this man was rich enough to take a helicopter, he was worth impressing. "Alexander," my father boomed as they stepped onto the deck. "Welcome to the family estate. I apologize for the chill, but the view is worth it, right?" Alexander didn't smile. His eyes swept over the lodge, the guests, the extravagance. "It is certainly impressive, Gary." Come, let me introduce you," my father said, steering him toward the glass doors. But then he stopped, realizing I was blocking the path. He looked at me with a flicker of annoyance, then plastered on a fake smile for Alexander's benefit. "And this is my eldest, Grace," he said, waving a hand at me dismissively. "She dabbles in computers up in the Bay Area. Very quiet. You know how the tech types are." He tried to usher Alexander past me, treating me like a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently. "Grace," Alexander said. He stopped moving. He didn't look at my father. He looked directly at me. He extended his hand. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person." I took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and professional. "Alexander, thank you for coming." My father laughed nervously. Oh, you two don't need to bother with pleasantries. Grace isn't involved in the business side of things. She's just here for the cake. Alexander turned his head slowly to look at my father. His expression was perfectly neutral, but his eyes were cold. Actually, Gary, Alexander said, his voice smooth and dangerous. Grace is the reason I am here. My father blinked. Excuse me. I wanted to see the asset, Alexander said, gesturing vaguely at the house but looking at me. Before we close the deal. My father puffed up, misunderstanding completely. Of course, the asset. Yes, this house is the crown jewel. Fully paid for, fully owned by the family. A symbol of our stability. I almost laughed. A symbol of stability. It was a symbol of my credit score. Excellent, Alexander said. He tapped the briefcase in his hand. Then I suppose we should go inside. I have the paperwork ready. My father looked like he had won the lottery. He thought this was the merger that would save his drowning development firm. He thought Alexander was his golden parachute. He had no idea he had just invited the Trojan horse into his castle. Alexander wasn't the boss. He was my employee. He was the public face of the holding company I used to buy up my father's distressed debt 3 months ago. My father thought he was shaking hands with his savior. He didn't realize he was shaking hands with his executioner. After you, Alexander said to me, stepping aside to let me pass. I walked past my father. I walked past my mother. I walked past my sister. I walked into the warmth of the lodge, knowing that the cold was about to follow me inside. The warmth of the lodge felt artificial, like standing under a heat lamp. Inside, the party was in full swing. My father, Gary, was parading Alexander around the room like a trophy, introducing him to confused relatives as the future of the company. He was high on adrenaline, drunk on the illusion of success. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought he had the house, the merger, and the obedient daughter all lined up in a row. I walked over to the small stage where the band was taking a break. I didn't ask for permission. I just took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whine cut through the chatter. The room went silent. My father spun around his hand, still gripping Alexander's shoulder. He smiled, but his eyes were tight. He thought I was finally going to give the toast, he demanded. He thought I was going to surrender. I need to make a correction, I said. My voice didn't shake. It echoed off the glass walls, magnified and inescapable. The document my father showed you earlier, the deed transferring this property to my sister, is a forgery. A gasp rippled through the room. My mother dropped her champagne flute. It shattered the sound, sharp and violent in the silence. I did not sign it. I continued, locking eyes with my father. This estate belongs to me. And as of 10 minutes ago, I have filed a police report for fraud and trespassing. Officers are currently en route to escort the wedding party off the premises. My father's face went from flush to gray in a heartbeat. He looked at the guests. He looked at Cheyenne, who was standing frozen by the cake. But mostly, he looked at Alexander. He saw the look on Alexander's face, cool, detached judgment. And in that moment, Gary knew. He knew the merger was dead. He knew the lie was over. There is a specific mechanism in psychology called the narcissistic injury. It happens when a narcissist's public mask is ripped away, exposing the failure underneath. They don't feel shame. They feel a rage so primal it overrides self-preservation. When they can no longer control the narrative with words, they try to control it with force. They don't see you as a person anymore. They see you as the object that broke their reflection. I saw it happen in real time. The mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. You ungrateful little bitch. He didn't walk toward me. He charged. He moved faster than a man of 55 should be able to move. He wasn't my father in that moment. He was a cornered animal, realizing the trap had snapped shut. Gary, no, my mother screamed. It was too late. He stormed onto the stage. I didn't back away. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground because I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a tantrum. This was the evidence I needed. He swung. It wasn't a slap. It was a closed fist strike. His knuckles connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack. The force knocked me off my feet. I hit the hardwood floor, hard, my vision exploding into white stars. The microphone clattered away, screeching with feedback. For a second, there was absolute silence. No breath, no movement, just the ringing in my ears. Then the chaos broke. Screams, shouts, the sound of Alexander moving fast. I pushed myself up on one elbow. I tasted copper. I touched my lip and my fingers came away red. My face throbbed with a dull, heavy heat. My father stood over me, chest, heaving his fist still clenched. He looked wild, disoriented, as if he couldn't understand why the room was staring at him with horror instead of respect. Alexander was there in a second, shoving my father back, placing his body between us like a shield. "Don't you touch her." Alexander snarled, his voice low and lethal. "She deserved it," my father shouted, spitting the words. "She's trying to ruin this family. She's trying to humiliate me." I stayed on the floor for a moment longer, not because I couldn't get up, but because I needed to see it. I looked past Alexander's legs. I looked into the crowd. And there it was. 3 feet away, a cousin was holding up her phone. The camera lens was pointed directly at us. And right next to the lens, a tiny red light was glowing, steady and bright. Recording. My father thought he had just taught me a lesson. He thought he had reestablished his dominance. He didn't realize he had just handed me the nuclear codes. I wiped the blood from my lip. And as I looked up at the man who had bullied me for 29 years, I didn't cry. I smiled. Alexander didn't just shove my father, he engaged him with the efficiency of a bodyguard clearing a threat. He forced Gary back against the head table, rattling the silverware. My father stumbled, catching himself on a chair, looking more offended than ashamed. "She provoked me," Gary shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You saw it, Alexander. She's hysterical. She's trying to sabotage the merger." I stood up. My head was spinning, but my mind was crystal clear. I didn't need help. I didn't need a hand. I pulled myself to my feet, smoothing the emerald velvet of my dress. "There is no merger," Gary Alexander said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. He adjusted his cuffs, looking at my father with the kind of detached disgust you reserve for something you stepped in. "What are you talking about?" my father sputtered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We have a deal. You're the investor. You're here to save the company." Alexander laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. "I am not an investor," Alexander said. "I am an employee. I serve at the pleasure of the majority shareholder of Chimera Holdings." My father blinked, confusion warring with the adrenaline. "Chimera, I don't know. Who is the shareholder?" Alexander stepped aside. He didn't point. He just turned his body, clearing the line of sight between my father and me. "She is," Alexander said. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My father looked at Alexander. Then he looked at me. He looked at the daughter he had called a dabbler. The daughter he had just punched in the face. "Grace," he whispered. "That's impossible. She fixes computers." "I fix inefficiencies," I said, my voice steady despite the copper taste in my mouth. And 3 months ago I identified a massive inefficiency in the market. A failing development firm loaded with bad debt and managed by a narcissist. So, I bought it. I took a step forward. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. "I own your debt, Dad. Every cent of it. I own the loans on your equipment. I own the lien on your office building. And until 5 minutes ago, I was willing to offer you a restructuring plan. I was willing to let you retire with dignity." I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked from the fall, but the protocol was still active. "But then you decided to steal my house," I said. "And then you decided to put your hands on me." "It was a mistake," my father yelled, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. "Grace, listen, we can work this out. We're family." "Alexander," I said, not taking my eyes off my father. "Execute the phantom equity protocol." Alexander opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a tablet. "Clause 15.3 of your loan agreement," Alexander recited, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "In the event of criminal conduct by executive management, specifically assault, fraud, or gross negligence, the lender reserves the right to trigger immediate asset seizure to protect the collateral." "You can't do that," my father gasped. "We just did," Alexander said. He tapped the screen. A collective buzz went through the room as phones lit up. But the loudest sound came from my father's pocket. His phone pinged. Then it pinged again. And again. A cascade of notifications. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. "My accounts," he wheezed. "They're locked. All of them. Your corporate accounts are frozen pending an audit," I explained calmly. "Your personal accounts have been levied to cover the breach of contract. Your pension is currently being liquidated to pay the vendors you stiffed for this party." Cheyenne ran up to him, grabbing his arm. "Dad, what does that mean? What about the house? What about my wedding gift?" I looked at my sister. "The house is mine, the company is mine, and the money—" I pointed to the red recording light still glowing in the crowd. You just watched him punch it away. My father slumped into a chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked small, he looked ruined. He looked at me, waiting for the mercy he had never shown me. "Grace," he pleaded. "You're taking everything." "No, Dad," I said, touching my swollen cheek. "I'm just taking what I paid for." I turned to Alexander. "Get them out of my house." 72 hours later, the silence in the lake house was absolute. I stood on the deck, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, watching the snow fall on Lake Tahoe. The flakes were thick and heavy, covering the footprints my father had left on the driveway, burying the tire tracks of the police cruisers that had taken them away. The physical aftermath had been swift. The police report was filed. The trespass warnings were issued. Alexander had handled the legal team with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring that by noon the next day, my father's access to corporate funds, company cars, and even his email had been revoked. Cheyenne had tried to storm back in to get her wedding trousseau. I had my security team leave her boxes at the gate. I didn't even look out the window to watch her load them into her rental car. I took a sip of hot coffee. It tasted better than the champagne. People often mistake revenge for a loud act. They think it looks like screaming matches, court battles, or public shaming. And yes, I did all of that. I burned their world down. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was this: the quiet. There is a concept I read about once called the sovereign state of silence. It is the idea that true power isn't about controlling others. It is about creating a perimeter that others cannot breach. For 29 years, my life was loud. It was filled with the noise of their demands, the static of their criticism, the constant grinding gears of their expectations. They thrived on that noise. They needed the chaos to hide their incompetence. But out here, watching the snow erase the world, I realized that peace is the ultimate status symbol. It is the one luxury my family could never afford because it requires a clean conscience to enjoy it. My father is currently meeting with bankruptcy lawyers. My mother is calling relatives, trying to spin a story that no one believes anymore because the video has 3 million views. Cheyenne is likely looking for a divorce lawyer since her husband realized he married a fraud. Their lives are loud. Mine is finally quiet. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to Dad. Delete. I scrolled to Mom. Delete. I scrolled to Cheyenne. Delete. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt like I was taking out the trash. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't their sister. I wasn't their banker. I turned back to the house. My house. The glass walls reflected the fire I had built in the hearth. It looked warm. It looked safe. I am no longer a territory to be conquered or an asset to be liquidated. I am a sovereign state. And the borders are closed. Grace found her peace in silence, but everyone's sanctuary looks different. I want to know, what is the one non-negotiable boundary you've set that finally gave you your freedom? Share your story in the comments. And if you're still fighting for that peace, share this video as a sign that you're done backing down.